My wife didn't just leave me. She tried to steal our future while I was at my desk building the system that stopped her. My name is Evan Cross. I'm 46 years old, and for 17 of those years I've stared at rivers of numbers as a senior fraud systems architect at Sentinel Mutual in Harborview, North Carolina. My job is simple to explain and difficult to do. I design rules that make stolen money freeze like ice in a pipe. At 9:11 a.m. on a rain-polished Tuesday, a message slid across my phone screen. I want a divorce. I found someone who actually makes me happy. There wasn't even a greeting. No preamble. Just an emotional guillotine dropped between two calendar reminders. A second text followed before the first could bruise. I've already moved the retirement funds to my private account. Keep the house. I won't need it. I set the coffee down, very carefully. Somewhere on the floor below, the building's fans hummed through the vents, steady and calm. I didn't respond with questions or pleas. Instead, I opened the dashboard no one else had, my dashboard, an aggregation I'd built at home on quiet weekends. Every shared account Sabrina and I used flowed into it. Checking, savings, brokerage, IRAs, the emergency fund, even the little card she thought I didn't know about. It wasn't distrust that made me build it. It was habit. I've learned you can't fight what you can't see. Within seconds, the graphs hiccuped. Sabrina had pushed 3 high-value transfers across 2 institutions. My rule set saw what it always sees, not a marriage, or a history, or a face, but patterns. Unauthorized withdrawals from protected accounts. Anomalous routing. The absence of the second signature I'd required when balances crossed established thresholds. The anti-fraud logic did exactly what I designed it to do. It screamed, politely, efficiently, and with the force of federal compliance behind it. Hold, it said. Manual review, it said. NO release without verification, it said. By 11:15 a.m., the receiving bank notified me that all inbound deposits tied to those initiating accounts were frozen pending investigation. I didn't pump a fist. I didn't gloat. I cleared the alert banners from my personal phone, turned back to my work monitor, and resumed auditing a manufacturing client's strange midnight wire to a check supplier that didn't exist last week. When you spend your life separating facts from stories, you learn to let the facts breathe. Sabrina would discover the freeze with no help from me. The system doesn't care if you're crying. The system cares if you're lying. We'd been married 21 years. We'd grown up in the same small coastal town, 2 blocks apart and worlds different. She was the kid who threaded conversations like string through a needle, student council, theater, yearbook. I was the boy with a shoebox ledger under his bed that tracked every chore dollar and bus ticket. Somewhere between prom night and a 1-bedroom apartment above a barber shop, our differences started to look like balance. She'd meet the room. I'd do the math. Sabrina built a career at Citron Edge Media, a marketing firm that treated conferences like a religion. She collected business cards the way some people collect shells. I built fraud nets. She stayed out late at networking mixers. I set alarms for pre-market data. For years, it worked. I carried the budgets and retirement forecasts. She carried us through rooms where my quiet didn't reach. But fog doesn't arrive as a wall. It creeps. 6 months ago, Sabrina stopped asking me about our retirement target. 3 months ago, she applied for a store card and shrugged when I asked why. 2 weeks ago, she looked around the guest room and said, "We don't really have visitors. Maybe we should simplify." The word felt like sand in my teeth. My sister noticed the static at Thanksgiving. "She seems somewhere else," Tasha whispered while we rinsed casserole dishes. I chalked it up to end-of-year pressure. Sabrina laughed louder than usual that night. She also left our bedroom light on when she slept, something she hadn't done since college. The Monday night before she left for a conference in Miami, she asked, too casually, "So, ballpark, what do we have between the retirement accounts and investments?" $850, I said, cutting into a roasted chicken breast. "Why?" "Just curious," she said, and kissed me on the top of the head as if curiosity didn't weigh 10 pounds. When her texts landed Tuesday morning, it all snapped into focus. She hadn't been stressed. She'd been planning. That's the difference between noise and signal. At 10:47 a.m., my phone rang. "Evan, my card isn't working," Sabrina said. Her voice was pitched into that professional half-smile she used when open houses went empty on rainy Saturdays. "What's your balance?" I asked, already knowing. Zero. How can it be zero? I moved. Right, I said. Silence. Then, what did you do? I didn't do anything. The system flagged the withdrawals from protected accounts. With no joint authorization, they're frozen for review. How long? 5 to 7 business days. Maybe longer. She exhaled like a laugh, and a sob had collided. You can call them, right? Tell them it was authorized? It wasn't, I said, because the truth takes the least time. She hung up. I looked at the window. Rain kept at it like a drummer. I turned back to the check wire and documented the discrepancy. If I focused on another person's problem, I didn't have to look too closely at my own. By Friday afternoon, Sabrina had sent 20-plus texts I didn't read. I spent the evening with Ruth Delgado, a family lawyer who wore kindness like armor and experience like a second blade. File now, she said, sliding a packet across the table. Document everything. Don't touch the joint checking. Leave it exactly as it is. Judges like clean lines. Monday morning, I filed for divorce. No alimony request. No split of unaffected assets. The house deed was already in my name. Prudence disguised as sentiment. The joint checking had $3,150 in it, the amount we always kept for real emergencies. She could have that. Consider it the last time I funded one of her plans. On Tuesday, the shape of my life shifted from shock to structure. I ate at my desk and let the office noise pull me through the day. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same bracketed logic that protected strangers had protected me. Sabrina hired Morgan Pike as her attorney. I knew Morgan from neighborhood fundraisers, the kind of woman who could eat a loophole with a spoon. She filed a motion claiming I had weaponized professional knowledge to sabotage marital assets. Ruth flipped through the brief and rolled her eyes. If I had a nickel for every time someone pretended an automated hold was a personal vendetta, I could retire to a porch swing on a lake. A hearing date went on the calendar. Meanwhile, Sabrina called the house 17 times Sunday evening. I answered on the 18th. You need to call the bank, she said. Tell them it was authorized. Where are you, Sabrina? Phoenix, she said after a pause thick enough to chew. With friends. Phoenix isn't Miami. It's complicated. Call your conference organizer. Call Citron Edge. Ask them to send a letter. Don't start, she snapped and hung up. Monday, my home-built monitor flagged something new. 3 credit applications using our address. Denied, 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 thanks to the open fraud review. The system had turned her clever exit into a cul-de-sac. No funds, no fresh credit, no cover story that would hold. On Wednesday, Alan Mercer, Sabrina's boss at Citron Edge, called my desk. Evan, quick question, he said carefully. Was Sabrina in Miami? Our HR has no record of her conference registration. You'd have to ask her, I said. It wasn't my job to glue her lies together. We've noticed irregularities in her expense reports, Alan continued. If she reaches out, never mind. Thank you. I set the phone down and stared at my hands. They looked steady. They didn't feel steady. By Thursday, the fraud investigation had widened like a crack in a windshield. A bank investigator named Gregory Shaw asked to meet. He had printouts and a coffee he didn't drink. Mr. Cross, he said, your personal monitoring flag transfers from corporate accounts tied to your wife's workstation IP. We now believe there's a larger scheme at Citron Edge. What does larger mean? Months, multiple accounts, coordinated movement. I tasted metal. How much? Preliminary. Low 7 figures, he said. We'll refer to federal authorities. That night, I sat at the kitchen table and watched the living room clock count 30 minutes of my life into neat clicks. It wasn't the money that hurt. It was the efficiency. Text, transfer, vanish. She took apart our marriage like a spreadsheet. Friday, the emergency hearing was quick and bloodless. The judge scanned the automated hold notices, frowned at Morgan's attempt to turn algorithms into malice, and ruled that the joint checking was sufficient for temporary needs. Sabrina left with nothing new. Consequences always feel personal when they land on you. The following Monday, 2 people waited for me in Sentinel Mutual's lobby, Agent Priyanka Rao of the U.S. Attorney's Office and Sergeant Elena Marsh from Harborview Financial Crimes. They set up in a conference room and didn't waste syllables. Mr. Cross, Agent Rao said, your personal monitoring created a trail we couldn't get through corporate channels. We now believe your wife, along with Colin Drake, a senior director at Citron Edge, used marketing budget lines to siphon funds. We also have reason to suspect a real estate manipulation scheme. I blinked. They were stealing houses too. Not directly, Sergeant Marsh said. They used shell buyers to pressure employees with financial stress into quick, below-market sales, then flipped those properties. Gregory Shaw's bank printouts slid across to me like a confession. My eye snagged on a line that knocked the air out of my lungs. Address: 114 Sparrow Street. Our home, listed at preliminary valuation, $310,000. 5 years ago, we bought it for $305,000. The current market put it near $500,000. They were going to try to force your hand, Marshall Marsh said. Artificial pressure. Then an investor shows up with a miraculously fast cash offer. The trap had a blueprint. It also had a problem. I keep receipts. I keep logs. I keep time. Over the next week, I gave Agent Rao and Sergeant Marsh access to everything I owned that could hold a bite. Monitoring scripts. Timestamps. The decision tree I'd coded for myself years back that automatically labeled anomalies and sent me summaries at dawn. I wasn't the story's hero. I was the person who had built a clean path from what happened to prove it. Sabrina texted from an unfamiliar number. They're saying federal charges. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I typed back. You didn't mean to get caught. Then I set the phone face down and returned to my keyboard. It's hard to hear your own bitterness. The clack of keys helps. Grand jury day tasted like dry air and old varnish. I wore a navy suit and clipped answers to precise length. I explained, for people who don't live in code, why my system flagged what it flagged. No editorializing. No extra adjectives. The prosecutor asked whether I'd ever accessed Sabrina's work accounts. No, I said. The system monitors only shared, consented connections. It flagged patterns, not secrets. On the lunch break, I sat on a bench in the corridor and watched a man in a mechanic's shirt hold his daughter's hand while she spun in small circles, excited to hear her shoes squeak on the waxed floor. It reminded me of Nora, that's our daughter, at 7, delighted by sounds adults stop hearing. Now she was 20, at college 2 hours away. I told her the truth in one long phone call that mostly consisted of silence. She'd said, "Dad, I'm okay." And I had believed her because she doesn't lie to me. The kid of a fraud analyst learns early what earns trust and what loses it. A week later came indictments. Sabrina West, Colin Drake, and 5 other Citron Edge employees, charged with wire fraud, conspiracy, and embezzlement. In the bail hearing, the judge used the phrase flight risk and set bonds in numbers I recognized from business cases, not personal life. Sabrina didn't post. She traded a suitcase for a jumpsuit. Morgan Pike called Ruth and floated an exchange, my testimony about Sabrina's character, in return for an uncontested divorce that left me with the house and undisturbed accounts. Ruth asked what I wanted. I'll testify about facts, I said. I'm done rewriting stories to make them easier to hear. In Sabrina's home office, the room she'd wanted simplified, I found a notebook with real estate sales data, addresses circled in clean loops. 12 of them belonged to Citron Edge employees or their relatives. The page with 114 Sparrow had a star next to it and a handwritten estimate. Offer, 310. Market, for 190. Flip target, 520. She'd planned it like a campaign. She'd used skills we'd both been proud of. It made me want to put my fist through a wall and also sit on the floor and cry. Instead, I took photos, cataloged it, and added the notebook to the evidence box. Trial prep moved like the slowest river. Agent Rao's team mapped every transfer. Sergeant Marsh's unit interviewed employees whose names I recognized from Sabrina's holiday party conversations. The story that emerged fit together like an ugly jigsaw. Colin Drake set up project-based marketing initiatives that funneled budget to outside vendors. Those vendors existed only on paper. Funds bounced twice and landed in accounts managed by Sabrina. Meanwhile, they cultivated financial distress among targeted employees, nudges here, delays there, and then produced investors ready to help. It would have worked longer if Sabrina hadn't tried to vacuum our retirement in one brazen grab. Greed is the worst quality control. The morning of the first hearing, I saw Sabrina in person for the first time since the texts. The courthouse hallway smelled like coffee and printer toner. She looked smaller, hair pulled back without its usual salon confidence. There's a human in there, my mind said. as if the facts weren't true. Humans commit crimes. Humans betray. Humans also sit with lawyers and stare at terrazzo floors. Why? She asked as I passed. Why what? I said. Why did I notice? Why did the system work? Why did you plan crimes with someone who thinks PowerPoints are alibis? She closed her eyes. I got lost, she whispered. Get found without me. I said. The trial itself compressed months of investigation into 17 days of exhibits, testimony, and the kind of silence 12 people share when they're deciding whether your tomorrow looks like today. I took the stand twice. The first time, I explained the technology, a scalpel, not a hammer. The second, the prosecution asked me about trust. The defense objected. The judge allowed 2 questions. Did you know your wife was doing this? The prosecutor asked. No, I said. I trusted her. When did that trust end? When my system flagged our retirement in motion at 9:12 a.m. and the text arrived at 9:14, I said. The order matters. On day 12, Colin Drake cracked. His plea deal painted Sabrina as the coordinator who balanced the books, made sure numbers inside Citron Edge's ERP wouldn't light up for internal audit. The prosecution played recorded calls. Sabrina's voice. Evans focused on his own systems. He'd never go near my work accounts. It landed like a dull knife. Even your virtues can be used against you. On day 17, the jury 4-person stood. Guilty on 12 counts of wire fraud. Guilty on 8 counts of conspiracy. Guilty on 2 counts of embezzlement. Sentencing 6 weeks out. I walked out without talking to the press, without calling anyone. I put my hands on the steering wheel and breathed until my chest stopped feeling like a drawer someone couldn't close. 6 weeks later, Sabrina got 18 years. Colin got 9. Restitution orders followed, real numbers with commas that would take lifetimes to unwind. The court returned our retirement funds to original accounts. The joint checking, my last gesture, had been consumed by lawyers and commissary. Fine. I listed the house. It sold for $497,000 after fees. I bought a smaller 1-story place in Brookhaven, closer to the inlet, where the air smells like salt and old wood. I kept my job at Sentinel Mutual and added new checks to our enterprise suite, routines born from the case that now catch similar schemes before they can muscle up. These updates will save companies millions, my boss Michelle Kwan said, and I nodded. That's the point. Revenge is hot for a second. Prevention is warm for years. The divorce finalized without theatrics. Ruth called me on a Tuesday and said, "You're free." I thanked her and stood in my quiet kitchen as if someone had removed large furniture from my ribs. I started teaching a night course twice a week at Coastal Piedmont University, Financial Crime Analytics. The first night, 29 students sat in a tiered room and waited like people do at the beginning of something. I told them my class was about evidence more than evil. Systems protect when people can't, I said. But systems are made by people, so make them honest. After, a student with a messy bun and fierce eyes waited until everyone left. My grandmother got scammed last year, she said. They told her my brother was in jail and needed bail. We talked until the janitor flicked the lights. Making good systems is one way to forgive the world a little. Every few months, a letter came from prison. Sabrina's handwriting had changed into small, careful shapes. She wrote about a book club, about a woman named Anne-Marie who had a laugh that sounded like a kettle, about how she'd started working in the prison library and learned that order can be a kindness. She wrote, "I'm sorry," 3 different ways in 3 different letters. I put them in a file folder labeled correspondence. I didn't write back. That wasn't cruelty. That was surgery without anesthesia. You stop the bleeding, or you don't. Nora visited on weekends when her studio schedule allowed. She's studying industrial design, because of course she is. She likes beautiful things that also work. We hiked. We built a coffee table from reclaimed boards. She asked blunt questions and listened to real answers. One Sunday, she handed me her phone with a smile. My professor told our class about a case where a spouse tried to drain the retirement, but the system stopped it, she said. He called it the Harborview example. We laughed harder than the joke deserved. A year passed without ceremony. The air sharpened and softened twice. In time, I stopped waking at 3:30 a.m. to check balances. I still keep the dashboard. I still check it. But I no longer mistake vigilance for living. One afternoon in early spring, I was leaving the Sentinel building with Michelle when a man I didn't recognize stopped us. He introduced himself as Jared Olmsted, a former junior accountant at Citron Edge who'd testified in a minor role at the trial. He'd found a new job, moved apartments, started over. "I wanted to tell you thanks," he said. "You didn't know me, but your system, it made it possible for me to stay in the city. Without that evidence, I'd be gone." He shook my hand harder than necessary and then walked away, embarrassed by his own gratitude. I stood still for a long time after he turned the corner. Systems are unromantic until they save someone you'll never meet. Sabrina's last letter arrived 3 weeks before the second spring. She said the prison had started a financial literacy class and the counselor had asked if she'd help. "I told them the truth about why I know what I know," she wrote. Some of the women say it helps to learn from a person who has done harm and is trying to aim knowledge in a better direction. I placed the letter with the others and made tea. It's possible for a person to be two things at once: the hand that took and the hand that now returns what she can. I don't have to be the judge for that to be true. On the anniversary of the texts, dates matter to me. They're the spine of stories. I walked the boardwalk in Brookhaven at dawn. The sky had the smudged pink of a healed bruise. A pelican arrowed into the water with the kind of competence I envy. I sat on a bench and drafted the first lecture of the new semester: How to Design a System That Tells You the Truth. I titled the slide "Assumptions Are Expensive, and a Second Authorization is a Love Language because humor keeps the room awake, and because it's not wrong." When people ask about revenge, they want fireworks. They want handcuffs and crying apologies and a monologue that lands like a punch. I don't have that for you. The part of this story that glows isn't Sabrina's sentence or Colin's plea. It's an email from a client whose stolen payroll never reached the scammers because a rule I wrote stopped it. It's a 21-year-old in row 4 who changed her grandmother's phone number and set up call screening because of a case study we walked through. It's a house with no guest room because I don't need one right now, and a workshop where I rebuilt a toolbox that had belonged to my grandfather, each wrench cleaned and oiled as if care can travel through objects. Sometimes justice arrives in a uniform with a badge. Sometimes it arrives as numbers clicking into place, an alert chime at 3 a.m., an audit trail that says "not today." I used to think love was the opposite of systems, that one warmed and the other chilled. Now I think love, the real kind, builds systems that keep us from the edges of our worst ideas. If you were waiting for the moment I called Sabrina to rub in the verdict, it doesn't exist. The day she was sentenced, I drove to a hardware store and bought sandpaper. I had a table to refinish. Grain by grain, the surface under my hands became smooth enough to reflect light without distortion. That felt like a better ending than gloating ever could. A few weeks later, I stood in front of my class and asked them what a fraud rule is for. Hands shot up: to stop theft, to meet compliance, to make audits easier. I nodded. Then I wrote on the board: to tell the truth earlier. We underlined it twice, because sometimes you have to mark the parts you want to remember. Then we built a small detection routine together, something inelegant and strong. Code that catches you before you step into the hole you dug. Here's the hook I wish I'd learned sooner. Your future can be stolen in a sentence, but it can also be saved by a system you built in quieter hours. If you're listening to this and you've got an ache in your chest that says someone you love might be playing with matches, hear me. Gather your records. Set your rules. Choose the truth before it chooses you. I still check my dashboard every morning. Not because I'm afraid. Because I like the feeling of a clean line. The numbers sit there like obedient dogs. The accounts hum. The world is not, in fact, on fire. Sabrina tried to disappear with our retirement and flip our house like it was a prop in an ambitious pitch deck. The system said no. Investigators followed the threads. 12 families got restitution. My daughter designed a lamp that looks like the moon and sells them online from a studio that smells like sawdust and gratitude. I teach 2 nights a week and keep a coffee can of screws that don't fit anything anymore, but might someday. If you need an ending, take this one. I didn't have to destroy anyone to win. I didn't even have to raise my voice. I just had to let the rules work and then keep living. And when the sun comes up over the inlet and the pelicans go to work the way they always have, I feel something like forgiveness. Of myself, mostly, for not seeing sooner, for loving loudly, for building systems that kept their promises when a person didn't. That's enough. That's everything.